Have you ever poured your very soul into something, only to have it torn to shreds in front of everyone who matters? I have. I can still feel the profound chill of that executive conference room, the polished oak of the long table reflecting 12 pairs of eyes, all of them studiously, painfully avoiding mine. My project, the culmination of nearly a year of my life, lay in a disorganized heap on the floor. And then came the word from our new CEO, Julian, a single venomous word that echoed in the suffocating silence: garbage. He didn't just reject my work, he tried to erase my worth. So if you're watching this right now, maybe you're in your car stuck in traffic, or on your lunch break trying to catch a moment of peace, just tell me one thing. Where are you listening from? Drop your city or country in the comments. I want to know how far this story travels, and if some part of you recognizes that feeling, that sting of being utterly dismissed, then stay with me. My name is Aria Evans. For 8 years, I was the lead product strategist at Viridian Dynamics. I wasn't just an employee, I was part of its DNA. I joined when we were a scrappy startup in a cramped office that always smelled faintly of burnt coffee, and I helped build it, brick by brick, into a respected industry player. I knew our clients by name. I knew their children's names. I knew the intricate hair-pulling problems they faced because I had spent hundreds of hours listening to them. But on that Tuesday morning, none of that history seemed to matter. I stood before the senior leadership, my carefully prepared presentation glowing on the 80-inch screen behind me. Each slide was a story told with data, a testament to weeks of painstaking analysis, hundreds of user interviews, and a deep, empathetic understanding of our clients' needs. This wasn't just another proposal, it was our future. It was a clear, data-driven path to secure our market leadership for the next decade, a fortress against the encroaching competition. The project, codenamed Nightingale, was designed to solve the single biggest pain point for our flagship client: Apex Solutions' workflow inefficiency that was costing them, by my conservative estimate, 7 figures a year. The room was silent, but it wasn't the silence of rapt attention. It was the tense, watchful quiet of a royal court waiting for the king's decree. And our king was Julian Croft, hired 3 months ago with a mandate to disrupt. Julian was the quintessential Silicon Valley import. His reputation preceded him, a charismatic, silver-tongued leader known more for burning through obscene amounts of investor capital on flashy, short-lived projects than for building anything of lasting value. Throughout my entire 20-minute presentation, his attention remained surgically attached to his phone, his thumb moving in a lazy, dismissive scroll that screamed boredom. He didn't ask a single question. He didn't even make eye contact. I was on my final slide, a detailed, multi-phase implementation timeline. When he finally spoke, "Stop." The word cut through the room like a shard of glass. He looked up, his gray eyes as cold and empty as a winter sky. He pushed his chair back, the sound scraping harshly against the floor, and walked to the front of the room. He didn't look at me. He looked at the screen, a faint sneer playing on his lips. Then down at the printed research I had meticulously bound and placed on the table for each member, with a deliberate, almost theatrical gesture. He picked up the stack of documents, my work, my evidence, my passion, and simply let them fall from his hand. The papers fluttered down, a cascade of white settling in a messy, disrespectful heap around my shoes. "This," he announced to the room, his back still turned to me, "is amateur hour. It's unfocused, uninspired, and frankly, it's an insult to my intelligence. It's based on listening to customers complain. Customers don't know what they want, asterisk. We asterisk tell them what they want." He finally turned, his gaze sweeping over the silent leadership team, deliberately excluding me. "This is garbage. Get it out of my sight." A collective, silent gasp seemed to suck the oxygen out of the room. I felt the heat rise in my face, a primal flush of humiliation I hadn't felt since a childhood nightmare. But beneath that wave of shame, something else was taking shape, a cold, hard, and terrifyingly clear resolve. My eyes scanned the table. I saw Carol, my direct manager and mentor for 5 years, staring intently at her notepad, her knuckles white as she gripped her pen. She, who had championed this project from day one. She, who had told me just yesterday that this was genius. She didn't look up. No one did. They were all held captive by the same primal fear, the same instinct for self-preservation that turns colleagues into spectators at an execution. I didn't say a word. I didn't cry or protest. That's what he wanted. A reaction, validation of his power. I denied him that. I bent down with as much dignity as I could muster. My movements precise and unhurried. I gathered my scattered papers, stacking them into a neat pile, my hands refusing to tremble. I walked back to my seat, my spine straight, my breathing even. As I sat, Julian had already moved on, launching into his own vision, a chaotic storm of buzzword synergy, paradigm shifts, blue sky thinking, and empty promises. He was a performer, a snake oil salesman in a $1,000 suit, and the leadership team, my colleagues, were his captive audience, nodding along to a script they knew was fiction but were too afraid to challenge. He called my work garbage. What he failed to comprehend in his monumental arrogance was that he had just handed me a declaration of war, and in doing so, he'd made a fatal mistake. The drive home from the office was a study in surreal calm. The city blurred past my window, a silent movie of neon and concrete. I didn't turn on the radio. The silence in the car was a sanctuary, a thick blanket against the noise of my own humiliation. There was no hot, messy anger. Anger consumes itself. What I felt was the complete opposite. It was the chilling precision of a glacier, slow-moving but unstoppable, carving a new path through a familiar landscape. Julian had intended to break me. He had only succeeded in awakening a part of me that had been dormant for years, the part that understood strategy, not just as a business concept, but as a tool for survival. My apartment, with its clean lines and quiet order, was my command center. It stood in stark contrast to the corporate theater I had just fled. I walked past the company-issued laptop sitting in my bag as if it were radioactive. I went straight to my personal computer, the one I had built myself, component by component. I sat down, my posture perfect, and opened the encrypted drive where my real work lived. It was all there, a meticulous, parallel archive of the project's entire genesis. Every file was time-stamped, every asset logged, dating back 6 months, long before the project was ever officially sanctioned or even mentioned within Viridian's walls. My fingers flew across the keyboard, my movements unhurried and deliberate. Here were the initial wireframes and mock-ups, created on weekends using software I paid for with my own credit card, the license registered to my personal email address. Here were the digital receipts from my personal bank account for the small stipends I had paid to the 20 initial beta testers, a diverse group of industry professionals I had recruited myself. Here were the signed non-disclosure agreements I had drafted for those early feedback sessions, all conducted on my own time from a local coffee shop, far from the prying eyes of the corporate world. I had built the entire foundation of this project on my own time, with my own resources, fueled by a passion that the company could never truly own. This wasn't just a project, it was my intellectual property. As I was reviewing a folder of user feedback videos, a notification popped up on my screen. It was an email from my work account, forwarded to my personal inbox by a rule I had set up years ago for just such an emergency. The sender was the head of Viridian's legal department. The subject line, in aggressive all caps, read urgent handover of all project-related assets. My eyes narrowed. It had been less than an hour since the meeting. They were moving fast, trying to seize control before I had time to think. I opened the message. It was a short, brutally formal demand to immediately transfer all files, research data, communications, and source code related to Project Nightingale to a new team leader. But it was the salutation that caught my breath. It read, "Dear Ariana, They hadn't even bothered to spell my name correctly. It was such a small thing, a careless typo. But it spoke volumes. It was the final, dismissive flick of the wrist, a confirmation that, in their eyes, I was not just wrong. I was insignificant, a ghost in their machine whose name they couldn't be bothered to remember. I leaned back in my chair, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face for the first time that day. It wasn't a happy smile. It was a smile of grim realization. They wanted my work. What they didn't realize was that they were demanding something they had never owned in the first place. I didn't respond to the legal department's email. Answering an urgent demand with deliberate silence is a power move of its own. It creates a vacuum, and it makes the other side nervous instead. I spent the next 3 hours compiling every piece of evidence into a single, heavily encrypted, password-protected file, every receipt, every timestamped document, every personal email exchange with the beta testers, every version of the source code with its metadata proving creation dates outside of work hours. It was a digital fortress of facts, meticulously constructed out of a lifelong habit my father had instilled in me. He was an engineer, laid off after 25 years with the same company with nothing but a paltry severance. His one piece of advice to me was, always keep your own records. Never trust a corporation to remember your value. The next morning, I didn't go to the office. I took a personal day, citing a sudden migraine, a fittingly diplomatic lie. My real appointment was downtown, in a building of old brick and ivy, far from the gleaming glass towers of the tech campus. The law office of Catherine Brennan was understated and elegant. The walls lined with books, not corporate art. Catherine had a reputation for being the sharpest mind in intellectual property law, known for surgically dismantling the aggressive, bullying tactics of large corporations. She was in her 50s, with a calm, discerning gaze that seemed to see everything you weren't saying. I laid out my case with the same precision I had used to design my project. I didn't speak of humiliation or disrespect. I spoke of timelines, resources, and documentation. I presented the facts, one by one, creating a clear, undeniable narrative of ownership. I showed her the employment contract, pointing out the standard IP clauses. Then, I showed her my fortress of evidence. Catherine listened intently, her fingers steepled, not interrupting once. When I was finished, she took the flash drive I offered and plugged it into her laptop, her eyes scanning the contents on her private screen. The silence in her office was the antithesis of the silence in the boardroom. This was the quiet of professional analysis, of a brilliant mind weighing evidence and calculating odds as she worked. My phone, which I had placed face down on her desk, began to vibrate. The screen lit up with the name of Viridian's main office line. It buzzed insistently, a frantic, electronic plea for my attention. It buzzed again and again, a call from HR, a text from Carol. I didn't move. I let it continue its frantic dance, a small, contained tremor in the quiet room. Catherine glanced at the phone, then back at me, a flicker of understanding in her eyes before she returned to her screen. After what felt like an eternity, she leaned back in her chair. She removed her glasses, polishing them slowly with a cloth. "Miss Evans," she began, her voice even and measured. "Corporate IP law is designed to be a blunt instrument in the company's favor. Your employment contract's IP assignment clause is broad, as expected. They will argue that anything you created, even tangentially related to their business, belongs to them." My heart sank for a split second before she continued. "However," she said, putting her glasses back on and looking at me directly, "you're meticulous, almost obsessive. Record-keeping has created a factual narrative that is so overwhelmingly in your favor, it renders their standard claims moot. You have receipts, you have timestamps, you have third-party validation. They may have a claim to the presentation you gave on their premises, but the underlying intellectual property, the core of it all legally. Miss Evans, this is yours." A single, clean wave of vindication washed over me. It wasn't triumph. Not yet. It was confirmation. It was the validation of a truth I already knew in my gut. Catherine wasn't finished. The question now is not about ownership, but about strategy. They will come at you hard. They will threaten protracted and expensive litigation, assuming you'll be too intimidated to fight. They're counting on you to break. My position was legally sound now. I just had to decide how to leverage it. I walked back into the Viridian Dynamics office the next day with a newfound and dangerous sense of purpose. The air still felt charged from the meeting. With employees speaking in hushed tones and casting nervous glances toward Julian's glass-walled office, I ignored it all. My objective was not to engage in the drama, but to operate within it, unseen. I sat at my desk, responded to a few trivial emails, and acted, for all intents and purposes, like a loyal employee who had been humbled and was ready to comply. My first task was to respond to the legal department's strident demand. I opened a new message, attached a single file, a stripped-down, hollowed-out version of the presentation I had given. It contained only the public-facing slides, the glossy veneer, with none of the underlying data, the proprietary research, the user interviews, or the strategic analysis. The real heart of the project remained secure on my personal drive. I sent the email to the new team leader, a man named Leo who was one of Julian's recent sycophantic hires, with a simple, professional note. As requested, here are the project materials. Let me know if you need anything else. It was an act of malicious compliance, giving them exactly what they asked for, but none of what they actually needed. My next move was more critical. I opened my personal email account and composed a short, carefully worded message to Maria Flores, a former mentor who had left Viridian 2 years prior after clashing with the old CEO. She was now the creative director at Nova Dynamics, our fiercest and most respected competitor. The email was brief, just 3 sentences, inquiring if she was free for coffee to catch up on old times. I hit send, my heart beating a steady, deliberate rhythm. This was the first real move on the chessboard. The response came in less than 5 minutes, a testament to Maria's efficiency and, I suspected, her anticipation. I'd been waiting for this email for 2 years. Aria, she wrote, coffee tomorrow, my treat. A wave of relief, sharp and clear, washed over me. I wasn't just a disgruntled employee anymore. I was a strategic asset with a potential buyer. Later that afternoon, Leo swaggered over to my desk. He was young, arrogant, and carried himself with the unearned confidence of someone who has never truly been tested. Ariana, he said, mispronouncing my name again. I got your file. It's a little thin. We're going to need a lot more to work with. Julian's vision for this is huge, and we need your full cooperation to execute. He leaned in, lowering his voice conspiratorially. That includes your full client contact lists and your relationship notes, especially for Apex Solutions. We need to get in front of them right away. Show them the new, bolder direction. I looked at him, my expression a carefully constructed mask of neutral consideration. He was asking for my relationships, for the trust I had spent years building with clients, and he planned to squander it to push an inferior product born from his boss's fragile ego. It was a stunning display of combined incompetence and entitlement. He saw an employee he could bully. He didn't see the network of allies and the fortress of evidence that stood silently behind me. The coffee shop Maria chose was a small, independent place downtown, tucked away on a side street, far from the orbits of our respective corporate campuses. It was neutral ground. I arrived early, securing a quiet corner table. Maria walked in precisely on time, her presence as sharp and composed as I remembered. She was a master of her craft, someone who understood that great design was equal parts inspiration and warfare. She dispensed with the pleasantries. She sat down, looked me directly in the eye, and said, "He's a fool. Aria, a charismatic fool, which is the most dangerous kind. I've been watching him dismantle everything we built from the outside. It's painful to see." "It's worse from the inside," I replied, my voice low. "I can only imagine," she said, taking a sip of her espresso. "So let's be direct. You and I both know the industry landscape. Nova Dynamics has been trying to land the Apex Solutions account for 2 years. They're the white whale. We know their pain points, we know their deep frustrations with Viridian's aging platform, and we know you are the primary reason they've stayed loyal for so long. She leaned forward slightly, her gaze intense. If you were to become available, and if you happen to have a fully formed next-generation solution for their problems that was proven to be not the legal property of Viridian Dynamics, we would be very interested. This was it. The moment of truth. I didn't respond with words. Instead, I opened my personal laptop, turned it to face her, and launched the prototype. Her eyes, so sharp and analytical, widened as she navigated the interface. I watched her click through the user flow, her professional composure momentarily cracking. She saw the elegant simplicity, the intuitive design, the way it anticipated user needs and eliminated every single point of friction we had identified in our research. It was the exact solution she knew Apex needed, the one Viridian had just thrown away. "Oh, this is brilliant," she breathed, finally looking up from the screen. "Wait, is this the garbage?" "On the very same," I confirmed. "Except this version, the only working version, was developed entirely on my own time and with my own resources, and I have the mountain of documentation to prove it." A slow, wolfish grin spread across Maria's face. "Aria Evans," she said, "you are far more dangerous than I ever gave you credit for. I love it." The next evening, I was in the executive conference room at Nova Dynamics headquarters. The meeting was discreet, held after hours. Across the table sat Maria and her CEO, a man named David Chen. He had a reputation for being a shrewd but fair leader who valued talent and execution above all else. After a brief, professional introduction, he got straight to the point. "Maria has shown me your work, and my legal counsel spent the afternoon reviewing the documentation summary from your lawyer," he said, his tone direct and respectful. "We believe that, with your expertise in this platform, we can offer a superior solution and win the Apex account. We're prepared to give you the resources, the team, and the autonomy to make that happen." He slid a folder across the table. Inside wasn't just an offer, it was a statement, a senior vice president position, a significant salary increase, substantial equity in the company, and a written commitment that Nova Dynamics would cover all legal expenses, without limit, should Viridian attempt to litigate. I accepted the offer on the spot. The 2-week notice I had planned to write suddenly felt like an unearned courtesy. A war had begun, and I was no longer fighting alone. The final week at Viridian Dynamics was a master class in controlled performance. I completed my transition tasks, attended meetings, and offered polite, infuriatingly non-committal answers to Leo's increasingly desperate questions about the thin project file. I was a ghost in their machine, present in body but with my mind already strategizing 3 moves ahead at Nova Dynamics. Each day, I discreetly packed a few personal items, a framed photo, a favorite design book, a small desk plant so my final departure would go unnoticed. Friday afternoon arrived with a heavy, expectant stillness. At 4:45 p.m., I began my final ritual. I ran a military-grade wipe of my browser history, logged out of all personal accounts, and permanently deleted any non-essential local files from my company laptop. My desk, once a vibrant space of creativity, was now sterile and bare, except for the laptop, its power cord, and my access badge. At precisely 4:59 p.m., I opened my draft folder, took one last look at the resignation letter, short, professional, and effective immediately, and hit send. The email was addressed to Julian, with copies to Human Resources and Carol. Then, I powered down the laptop, placed it neatly in the center of the desk, laid my badge on top of it, picked up my purse, and walked away. I didn't look back. The walk through the near-empty office felt final, each step carrying me further away from the 8 years of my life I had invested in that place, and toward an uncertain but exhilarating future. As I stepped out into the cool air of the parking garage, my phone vibrated in my hand. It wasn't a call from a panicked Julian or a procedural drone from HR, as I had expected. It was a text message from an unsaved number, but I recognized the name instantly from my contact notes, Mark Jensen, VP of Operations at Apex Solutions. The message was short, but it landed with the force of a thunderclap. "Heard through the grapevine you might be a free agent," it read. "Is your garbage idea looking for a new home, call me?" I stared at the screen, a slow, genuine smile finally touching my lips. The pieces were moving faster than I had anticipated, before I could even begin to type a reply. Another message came through, this one from a former colleague on my old team, an engineer I trusted. "You are a legend." Julian just stormed through the office, losing his mind. He literally swept everything off his desk. Said your resignation was an act of corporate terrorism. Half the team is polishing their resumes. I stood there for a moment, the two messages glowing on my screen, a perfect summary of the chaos I had just unleashed. He thought he had 2 weeks to recover. He didn't realize the game was already over. My first Monday at Nova Dynamics felt like stepping through a portal into a different reality. The office was buzzing with a quiet, focused energy, the sound of people who loved what they were doing. It was a stark contrast to the fear-driven stillness that had defined my last few months at Viridian. My new team was sharp, engaged, and hungry to win. We spent the entire morning whiteboarding, mapping out an aggressive but achievable timeline. The Enterprise Solutions Summit was in 6 weeks. My prototype was robust, but turning it into a scalable, secure, enterprise-grade platform in that time was a monumental task. "It's not possible," one of the lead engineers, Ben, said, frankly, not as a complaint, but as a statement of fact, not from scratch. "We're not starting from scratch," I replied, pulling up the architecture diagram. "The core logic is sound. We're not building a car. We're bolting a jet engine onto a battle-tested chassis Nova's existing security and infrastructure." For the first time in a long, long time, I felt the pure, unadulterated excitement of building something great, without the crushing weight of corporate politics. That afternoon, I was in a strategy meeting with Maria and David Chen when David's executive assistant entered the room. "Mr. Chen," she said, a hint of confusion in her voice. "Julian Croft from Viridian Dynamics is on the line for you. He says it's urgent and personal." A sudden, cold silence fell over the room. David exchanged a look with Maria, a flicker of surprise followed by shrewd curiosity. He nodded to his assistant. "Put him through, on speaker." Julian's voice filled the room, strained and overly loud, the voice of a man desperately trying to project an authority he no longer possessed. "David, good to speak with you," he began, forgoing any real pleasantry. "I'm calling as a professional courtesy, a warning. Really, I understand you've recently hired Aria Evans. I thought you should know about the circumstances of her departure. She left without notice, abandoning key projects at a critical time. Her conduct was highly unprofessional, and I wouldn't want a respected partner like you to be blindsided by a disloyal and, frankly, unstable employee." I sat perfectly still, my expression as unreadable as stone. David listened patiently, his face a perfect mask of neutrality. When Julian finally finished his pathetic, slanderous tirade, David simply said, "Thank you for the information. Julian, I appreciate you taking the time to call." And then he ended it. The line went dead. Maria looked at me, then at David, a slow, predatory smile forming on her face. David leaned back in his chair, his eyes fixed on me. "Well," he said, his voice calm and steady, "that confirms we made the right decision. Anyone who inspires that much fear in a competitor is someone I want on my team." After the meeting, Maria walked with me back to my new office. As we were about to part ways, she paused, her expression serious. "He tried to salt the earth. Aria, burn your reputation so nothing could ever grow there again." She looked me in the eye. Instead, he just handed us the gasoline and a match. Later that evening, the prophecy began to come true. I received a series of texts from former colleagues. The news of Julian's desperate call had somehow leaked. His unprofessional attempt to sabotage me was the final straw for the remaining talent. 3 of Viridian's best senior engineers, the ones who would have been essential to any attempt to replicate my project, had resigned in protest, and so had Carol. He hadn't just tried to burn a bridge, he'd handed my new allies a torch. The 6 weeks leading up to the Enterprise Solutions Summit were a blur of focused, creative energy. My team at Nova Dynamics worked seamlessly, turning the prototype into a polished, fully functional platform. There were no egos, no politics, just a shared, exhilarating goal of building the best possible product. We ran user tests, refined every detail, and prepared for the presentation that we knew could redefine the entire market. We were ready. The summit was held in a massive convention center, a sea of booths and banners from every major player in the tech industry. The air buzzed with ambition and the quiet hum of 1,000 deals being made. Our presentation was scheduled for 2 o'clock in the main hall, peak time, as we did our final tech check. I saw a press release from Viridian Dynamics flash on one of the large screens. They had managed to schedule a last-minute presentation at 1 o'clock in the same hall. Julian was attempting to preempt us, to poison the well and set the narrative before we even had a chance to speak. It was a desperate, transparent move. I watched their presentation from the back of the hall. A ghost in the crowd, Julian took the stage with his usual performative swagger, but there was a new tightness around his eyes, a sheen of sweat on his brow. He spoke of revolutionary thinking and disruptive innovation, but the product his team demonstrated was an unmitigated disaster. It was a chaotic mess of flashy but useless features, a clear rush job that ignored the most basic principles of user experience. The interface was a confusing labyrinth of menus. Twice during the demo, the system crashed spectacularly, forcing a flustered Leo to restart it while Julian awkwardly tried to fill the dead air with more empty buzzwords. The audience grew restless. I could see people checking their phones, their expressions ranging from bored to openly skeptical. When it was our turn, the atmosphere in the room shifted. David Chen gave a brief, powerful introduction, and then I took the stage. I didn't open with buzzwords. I opened with a story about the real, daily frustrations of our target users, a story I knew by heart then. I began the demo. The platform, our platform, performed flawlessly. Every click was intuitive. Every feature had a clear and powerful purpose. I showed how a process that took their current system's 12 laborious steps could be done in 3 with ours. I showed them the data, the glowing user testimonials from our beta phase, the undeniable, clear return on investment. I kept my eyes on the audience, but from the corner of my vision, I spotted 2 familiar faces in the 3rd row. They were 2 of the senior engineers who had stayed at Viridian, sent by Julian to spy. Their faces were pale, their professional confidence visibly crumbling as they watched our demonstration unfold. They were witnessing the ghost of the project they had been forced to abandon. Now fully realized and more powerful than they could have ever imagined. The applause at the end was thunderous and genuine. I answered a few questions from the audience, and then, as the session wrapped up, David quietly intercepted me at the side of the stage. "Change of plans," he whispered. "Robert Vance wants to meet now. His team and ours, the penthouse suite." In the quiet of the penthouse suite, Robert Vance, the celebrated CEO of Apex Solutions, turned to face us. The mood was serious, charged with potential. "Miss Evans," he began, his voice deep and resonant. "For the last year, my team has told me Viridian has become complacent, slow, unresponsive. Today, Viridian showed us their future." He paused, his gaze unwavering. "Then you showed us our future." He gestured to Mark Jensen, who had called me the day I left Viridian. "Mark told me the story," Vance continued, a grim smile on his lips. "He told me they called your work garbage. I've learned one man's garbage is often another man's treasure. Your presentation wasn't just a demo, it was a confirmation. You didn't just build a new platform, you listened." He then looked at my new CEO, David Chen. "David, my legal team will be in touch with yours in the morning. We are prepared to terminate our contract with Viridian and begin migration to Nova Dynamics immediately. Congratulations, you've won the Apex account." Relieved smiles and firm handshakes filled the room. The shockwave of this decision would rip through the industry. The two spies from Viridian were now returning to a company that had just lost its flagship client in the most public way imaginable. The fallout was swift. By Monday morning, Viridian stock had plummeted over 30%, wiping out hundreds of millions in value. The narrative was clear. Julian's ego had driven away top talent and handed their biggest competitor the keys to the kingdom. Late that afternoon, I saw a notification Julian Croft's professional status was now open to work. He had been terminated. The board, faced with catastrophic losses and a talent exodus, had acted. His reign of terror was over. The news was satisfying, but my work wasn't done. As I was packing up to leave my new office, my phone rang. It was Arthur Vance, chairman of Viridian's board and, ironically, Robert Vance's older brother. "Arya," he said, his voice weary, "the board has made a change in leadership. We made a catastrophic mistake. We were blinded. We would like to formally offer you the position of Chief Executive Officer. Name your terms. We want you to come back and fix this." For a fleeting moment, I pictured it returning to the office I'd fled, wielding the power he'd abused. It was a tempting, poetic vindication, but it was a fantasy rooted in the past, and I was no longer looking backward. "Arthur," I said calmly, "I appreciate the offer more than you know, but I must respectfully decline. My future is with Nova Dynamics." I didn't need to tell him I'd been promoted to Chief Product Officer that morning. The heavy silence on his end of the line was answer enough. 3 months later, my new corner office overlooked the city. On my screen was an article, "How One Woman's Garbage Idea Reshaped an Entire Industry." My work was thriving, my team was growing, and we were pulling more clients from Viridian's shrinking portfolio. There was a soft knock on my door. It was Carol, my former manager, her face now relaxed and hopeful. She was here for her final interview to be the director of strategy on my team. We talked not as a boss and subordinate, but as two survivors who understood the value of a workplace built on trust, not fear. At the end of our conversation, I extended my hand. "Welcome to the team." He called my work garbage. I turned it into an empire. And the best part, I was just getting started.